Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Rashke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press. Our small press publishes books we want to see in the world, including Changing Paths by Yvonne Abreu, Conjuring the Commonplace by Lane Fuller and Corey Thomas Hutchison of New World Witchery podcast, and Verona Green, my latest book. Find out more about us and purchase these and other titles at thousandvoltpress.com. Mariah Stillbrook, originally from Iowa, lives in Colorado with her white German Shepherd husband and little girl. She graduated from the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. She spends most of her days writing, reading, and enjoying the occasional hike. In her late 20s, she realized that her writing was missing something: magic. Now she focuses her writing on horror and urban fantasy in both adult and young adult genres. Her first book, In the Pines, is out now. Mariah Stillbrook, welcome to WitchLit.
Hello.
Thanks for coming
glad
on.
To be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And I am super excited to talk about your book. It's always a treat for me when I get to read fiction. I talk to a lot of nonfiction authors, which I also love. No shade, but it's always a treat to get to read fiction. So I'm excited to talk about it. But my first question for everybody on the show, and I think this is maybe hits different a little bit for fiction authors, but there's this kind of conversation about people aren't reading as much and books are dead and blah 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 blah. So in that context, why still write? Why still write books?
I personally don't have a choice because that's what I grew up with, stories in my head. Mm-hmm. And if I don't write it out, I am afraid of what would happen to me. So even if no one was ever going to read my book ever, I would continue to write. But I also think it's important to keep pushing it because there's so much going on right now with AI and, it's a huge controversy and everything. We just need to really focus on creation and creativity. And that's not going to die. There's always going to be people. I feel strongly that there's always going to be people that are going to, be born creative. Mm-hmm. And you have to find that outlet. So it's not an option for me, at least.
Yeah. I think that's true for a lot of writers. I mean, I always joke that if I don't write, I get weird.
Oh, yeah.
Like, not in a good way weird. like in a bad way weird. So, yeah. I think I think that's true for a lot of folks. So you said you grew up with stories in your head. Did you grow up writing? I mean, was that always the plan or?
I did. I think my first quotation marks book that I ever wrote was called like 3 Fun Fiction Tales and More or something. And I think I was like 7 or 8 or whenever you can first write. It's all fuzzy, but I do remember my mom had a word processor. Remember those things?
Oh, yeah.
And because she was going back to get her master's in speech pathology. So my dad got her this special it looked like a computer to us because it was brand new technology. And I used it to write my 3 Fun Fiction Tales. And then I printed it out and I gave it to her. And I was like, where do we send it to get it published? She was like, she humored me. She's like, I don't think we're going to do this right now. Why don't we shelve it? So that was my first book that ever got shelved. But yes, I did grow up with them. And I moved on to poetry when I was a teenager because, broody teenage years, journaling and poetry, and then eventually started taking it seriously like in my 20s.
Mm-hmm. So what did actually so you've had, I'm going to spoil our plug section a little bit. You have several books coming out.
Yes.
So In the Pines, from reading your website, was not the first book that got accepted, right?
It is. It was the first. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
And then some others after that.
Oh, okay. So what did that look like? And what is it like to have like that many books in the hopper right now?
What did it look like getting to the publishing, you mean? Or,
yeah.
That looked like years of sitting in the trenches, wondering if it was ever going to happen, but believing it would. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that I probably was querying for about 10 years because I definitely made the mistake of not really knowing what I was doing. And I think my first query letter was like 2 pages long. and I didn't get any help with it at first. So I was just pretty much wasting my time. And then I did a lot of workshops and stuff like that to help me figure out, because I knew how to write. I just didn't know how to get picked up. Mm-hmm. So that is a learning curve. And it took me a while to get there. So when I was trying to query agents, and then I started doing those Twitter contests where you pitch, not really contests, but events. And
like the speed pitch kind of.
Yeah. The elevator pitch thing. And that's where I did get picked up. Creative James Media liked my pitch. And from there, it was picked up. And then a few months later, they asked if I had anything else. And I did, because I was in the trenches so long, I just kept writing. So I sent them my trilogy, and then I sent them my first horror. And that's where we're at now. All of those things are coming out between now and 2025.
Wow. And you're writing for adults and YA both, right? So what is that switch like in your brain? Like, how do you decide where this story goes for you?
I pretty much just start with whichever character walks up to me and wants to shake my hand and wants a story, because that's kind of how it works. And if the character is older, I'm like, okay, we'll go with adult. And if they're younger, typically it's going to be a young adult. But I'm one of the readers who loves to read everything. So I write, where it needs to be. If it's YA, I follow the little rules and all of that. But I want adults to enjoy it also. So I like to put in, like, my young adult fantasy, it's got some humor in there for everybody. So I try to reach out to everybody.
And I always feel like, really good writing, like with like characters you could embrace, not like it, yes, there are, I guess, tropes is not the right word. There's standards, expectations for YA writing, adult writing, all that. But yeah, like, if it's good writing, it's good writing, and people are going to enjoy that. So yeah, that makes sense to me too.
Yeah. And that's one of, like, I always think back to Neil Gaiman, because he's my hero, and everybody loves Neil Gaiman, right?
Everybody, it's so funny. I swear, literally his name gets invoked on every episode of the podcast. If it's not a drinking game, hopefully it will just mean eventually he will find the podcast and want to be on it. I don't know.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. I don't know that I would be able to speak. Unfortunately, that's the only thing.
Like, I can't get my foot out of my mouth, but I love it.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, he's just given great writing advice to people over the years, like in, Trips and Drabs. And I know he does like one of the masterclass courses and stuff like that too, which I haven't
actually
taken,
took that.
Oh, did you?
I don't know if I finished it, but I definitely took the majority of it. I'm bad at school.
Yeah, I did the one with Alan Moore through BBC Maestro, and that was really good. Alan Moore, self-professed, wizard and author. Which reminds me, like, one of the things that was interesting about your bio is, say, the thing that was missing from your writing was magic. So do you identify as a witch?
Yes,
or you just write about them?
No, I identify as a witch. I did when I first came out of the broom closet, because I always felt that way growing up, but I was raised in a Christian environment, Presbyterian church. And they were nice. They were not like a biased or anything like that, but still there were family members that were that way. So I was a little scared. And so when I finally came out of the broom closet, I started looking into Wicca, but I quickly realized I just don't want to answer to any religion at all. I just want to make my own rules and just do my own thing, because that's where I feel the most magical, I suppose, and the most myself. So I'm a pagan, eclectic gray witch. Definitely not a green witch, because the poor plants that come near me do not live, unfortunately. So, but
every magical practitioner has their expertise and their Achilles heel, I think.
Yeah, my probably obviously storytelling, but also healer. Before my old joints gave out, because I'm older than I look. I was a neuromuscular therapist since I was like about 21 years old. So I did that off and on until about a year ago, actually. So healer.
Yeah, no, that's great. So how do you, like, as a magical practitioner, as a witch, how do you, like, in this book, in the poems, obviously this is about a story of, I would say, a family of witches, but really it's like a soul family of witches.
Yeah.
So how do you decide, like, you know, real magic is not splashy on the page. So a lot of what we write about as witches is CGI magic. So how did you build your magical world? How did you decide what rules would be inside the box?
Really, all I did was I took what I like, pretty much my own beliefs, my own magical beliefs, and what I do in my own witchcraft practice and stuff like that. And I exaggerated it. So a lot like practical magic, a lot along the same lines of that. So instead of I do make handmade wands and I use them in my practice. So I made it so it actually really works. Like as far as making WitchLit or something like that, you know. So I just exaggerated what we already do in our practices.
Yeah. I love the wands in the book. For those who haven't had a chance to read it yet, the wands are kind of shifters, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it really, but they can be a broom, they can be hidden, you know, they can be lots of things, which I thought was a really interesting idea for the wands.
And each witch has their own, like, it's made out of whichever tree they associate with. Like Olivia's is willow. And since Ellie is a violinist, hers ends up being ebony, you know? So I have fun with that. Like, I just love giving each individual as much of an identity as I possibly can, because I am just drawn to psychology all over the place. And that's part of that, right?
Well, and I feel like, you know, I mean, I would say this is a character driven story. I mean, there's a lot of plot, but that's still, the characters are really, I think, what shines in the like, you just fall in love with all of these people you've created. So that makes sense to me, that's where you find your joy in writing, is with the characters. Yeah,
for sure.
What was the seed for this story? Was there a seed for this story for In the Pines?
There was. So in my bio, I said my writing was missing magic. This book actually started out as like a women's fiction. I'd kind of started writing fantasy, but I hadn't dove into it too much. And this started out as a women's fiction called Smackdown, where I was kind of taking the family dynamics that I grew up with my sister, my mom, and me, and totally exaggerating. They are very loosely based on us. And if anybody's close to one character, it's me and Ellie. Ellie's pretty much me. So, I had been going through some things there's a strong theme of addiction in my life. I myself had to overcome a very bad eating disorder when I was young. And I've gone back and forth with like self-medicating and stuff like that over the years. So I had to kind of get over that myself. And people flocked to me. I don't know, other witches, I'm sure, feel this way too, because a lot of us are empaths and people feel comfortable around us. And a lot of the friends I make come with baggage. And the relationships that I'm in also seem to have baggage. So I was dealing with a lot of that, people and their own addictions in my life and how that was affecting my life. My sister was going through similar things. And my mom is a beautiful fairy and she doesn't have a lot of issues, but I needed her in there too.
Right. Yeah.
Her issues are her hair. So that's why she's a broomhead in the book. But that was really the seed. I was kind of trying to figure things out by writing. And then all of a sudden I had this story and these sisters with their own problems that were completely fictional. You know, they each had, I was meeting these characters and it was helping me too, you know, to see how they were dealing with their problems, because as a writer, that actually happens, you know, your characters come alive and they have their own personalities. So,
yeah. I always joke a little bit that, you know, writing is a little bit like therapy for me. You know, I think it's like journaling taking to the extreme, maybe. And then, like I don't plot. I wait and find out what the characters want to happen. And, I love, I know there's the whole like pantser plotter thing, but I always feel like pantser is one of those words that tastes weird. So, I always prefer discovery writer or writing into the dark. Like one of those terms I like a little better than pantser.
I like that.
Because I feel like I know what I'm doing. I don't feel like I'm pantsing. I really feel like I'm just waiting to see what happens. Is that true for you too?
That's very true for me. I call myself like a plantster because I got from my very spectrumy dad a photographic memory that has never been handy for like social studies or science or anything like that. But I see my entire story in my head. So I never write it down. It's there. It's all packaged properly in there. And then I pants away, just going back and looking inside my head every now and again. But like, exactly what you said. Like, you start with something and it grows. You just have to keep watering it.
Yeah. So for this book, I mean, maybe it would be good if you feel comfortable, like just doing kind of a little synopsis. I know that's a horrible thing to ask a writer to do. But just kind of like maybe a quick, your elevator pitch for the story.
My elevator pitch?
For folks who haven't read it. So I don't want to spoil anything, but I want to give people kind of an idea of what's going on with the book.
Gosh, writers are the worst at talking about their book.
I'd rather write a whole novel than write.
I know. I could read the back of the book.
Yeah, sure. That works.
Okay. Can I have 1 second?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The writer that doesn't have a copy of her book in her studio. Okay. I'm going to read it because it sounds better because my little dyslexic brain sometimes shoots out words weird. 2 witches, 2 secrets, and a curse that could tear a family apart. Olivia and Ellie have lived their lives knowing a dark entity is stalking their family, determined to kill them all. After the death of Olivia's son, she abandons her magic and her family, leaving Ellie in a nightmare of heartbreak, her marriage crumbling, and her sister gone. Determined to save their mother, Ariana, from a spell that left her comatose, the 2 sisters must come together to unravel the riddle of the curse that has haunted their family for generations. But as they delve into the past, the truth they uncover is more twisted and treacherous than they ever could have imagined. Will they be able to break the curse, or will it consume them all?
Awesome. It's so nice to have someone else write those for you too.
I know. Like when people are like, why didn't you want to self-publish? I'm like, pretty much because I couldn't do that. I could not write that.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I originally published with another publisher, and then when they reorganized, I got my rights back, and my husband and I started our own publishing house. And so now I do have to write the back of those books, and I hate it. But I also have a posse of writers that helps me kind of like hammer it into something that will sell a book. So
that's good. We need that.
Yeah, I noticed in your acknowledgements that you also have a writing group and some early readers. So do you kind of want to talk about like your process of like working with those folks before the book even gets to the next stage?
So what I do, like, you mean like before I submit a book is what you're talking about? I read the book 1,000 million times, as every writer does. And then what I do is I hire beta readers because that was part of what took me so long, is because my husband and I weren't making a ton of money in our 20s and early 30s, and writers are poor usually. I was working at Starbucks, so I had time to, work on my craft because it was all I ever wanted to do. So I would try to have friends and family read it, and they would never get back to me. And as a writer, like, is that because they don't have time, or is that because it's terrible and they don't want to talk to me about it? So we started making a little more money. So we had a little more money to play with. And I started hiring beta readers. And that's when I started getting like feedback that my books were good. First of all, I was like, okay, not that person on American Idol that can't sing that thinks she can. And then I started also getting the critical feedback that I wanted. I am dyslexic. So sometimes when you write really fast, especially as a pantser, as you know, sometimes things just get introverted and I don't see it. So that was very helpful. But yeah, that's pretty much my process. I just hire beta readers. Usually I have a couple that I really love. And sometimes it depends on the project. I may hire like 4, but for the most part, I go to 1 or 2 and then I'm good to go. Then I feel pretty good about it. And as you may know, like the more books you write, the more confident you get. And you also see the same mistakes that you've always made, no matter what it is you're writing. And that gets easier to fix as you go. So that's just my process. Then I send it. So that's just me. And that's what's worked for me.
Yeah, I think it's important, like the idea about hiring beta readers. I think if you don't, like I really looked out and then I have a group of writers who are friends who we all beta read for each other. So we kind of have this, you know, we've all done it enough. We've all published, you know, we can kind of like give each other feedback on, you know, there's a hole here, or, you know, you've used the same name in the last 3 books. Maybe you need to give this character a different name, you know, something like that. And then, but it's, and I think it's, you know, beta readers has this idea, I think, for people that it's, oh, someone's just going to read your book and tell you it's great. Right. And it's like, what you really want as a writer is you want the critical feedback, even if it's not like, oh, this is perfect. You know, you want it because you want to make the book better. I mean, that's really the reason to do that, any of that. So, yeah, I think it is hard to get friends and family because even if they had something to say, they're not going to want to hurt your feelings. You know, they're not going to want to say, you know, there was this thing I wasn't really sure was working. And, you know, back to Mr. Gaiman, I love his advice about, you know, if someone tells you that something isn't working, it's not working. But if they tell you how to fix it, they're wrong. Like you have to figure out how to fix it, but they're probably right that something's not working. So.
Yeah. And I've found too, like, I don't know if you have ever felt this, but like when I'm writing something, I'll get like a little pinch in my stomach. And that's usually like my body telling me, you know, that's not going to work. But I've learned like when I ignore those are the parts that come back to me. Yeah. Like from, you know, the critiques. Someone will highlight that. And I'm like, oh, so I really know all along. I just need to listen to my damn self.
Yeah. I mean, I think listening to your gut is right. It's so hard because it is, you know, like we do read it 1,000 times. Like someone asked me like, well, how many drafts do you do before you, and I was like, I don't know, because I've read it so many times and changed things. I don't know. Is it draft 375 or the first draft? I don't know how you want to count that. Yeah. So yeah, like I think, you know, we read it so much, it's hard to be surprised by it. You also fill in what is in your head that maybe isn't on the page when you read. So yeah, but I think going with your gut is important. And you're right. There's always that like, I love this line, but oh, it's not working.
And I hate those. I hate those darlings, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Or especially like, I mean, for me, it's usually something that like I found in research, I really want to shoehorn into the book and then it just doesn't work. It just, there's not really a place for it. And it's like, but I have this piece of information I want to put in and no.
Yeah, it's hard. It does get a little easier to chop things, I feel like, as I go. But yeah, sometimes what you're chopping is one of the first things you started with. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like one of the first ideas you came, but then the book evolves so much that you're like, this doesn't even fit anymore. It's like going to the grocery store and you need to buy something and you come out with everything but that almost. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I also like, it's almost like that's what primed the story, but it's not really what the story is about. Like I think about that too. Like I've started a couple books where it's been like, I'll be like 2 chapters, 3 chapters in. I'm like, this is all preamble. This isn't important. And then what really should be the start of the book is like what I originally thought was like chapter 4. Yeah. So, yeah. Definitely. Yeah. It's, I don't know. Writing is an adventure. It's lonely business too, which I think again is why it's good to have folks who can, you know, kind of keep you on the, not really the straight and narrow, because I think writing should be a little bit transgressive, but who can just kind of say, yeah, this is working or this is not working. So it's good to not have to do that completely alone before you send it off into the ether. Yeah. Yeah. And I have this thing too where I love writing in third person. I love it. But for some reason, it always works better in first. And like my horror that I have coming out next year, I had initially written it in third person because I want to be a storyteller. But, you know, I sent it. That is one case where I did send it to my best friend, my best witch. And she read the first few chapters and she's like, not connecting. And the beta readers that I had hired too were like, I'm loving this story, but I just can't connect. And I was like, So I knew exactly by this time what I needed to do. And I wrote it right into first person. And the second I did that, I felt a shift. And I was like, I got goosebumps from the first line of the story. And I was like, okay, that's where she wants to sit. So that's sometimes the writer doesn't have a choice.
Yeah. No, I mean, sometimes the book tells you really what it's going to be, whether you think that's what it's supposed to be or not.
Yeah.
And I agree. I mean, I love the omniscience of third person writing. I feel like, you know, I did my first series in third person. And I feel like now going back, it would have been a better book in first person because you have to channel the story, right? Through what that person knows. And that really changes. I mean, it was close third, but you still can put stuff in that is not necessarily stuff they would know. And I think, you know, POV it's one of those things that, you know, you study if you do English lit and you know all that, but until you're writing it, like you really understand it on a different level.
Yeah. And, you know, the stories, for me, stories are alive, you know, and they do come to you in a certain way. And they're like, this is my identity. And I'm all, okay, I've just learned to stop fighting their identities. They're just like people. They're like, this is what I want to be. And I'm like, okay, fine.
Yeah. So for you, like, I mean, like, I think you're right. I think stories come to you and they kind of know what they want to be. Do you have like a ritual or anything you do around writing? Like, do you kind of have like a setup or like, what does your perfect writing day look like even?
Well, a perfect writing day would be to have the house to myself and be able to write whenever I wanted throughout the day. That's not a thing. So I do have a 3-year-old daughter and a husband and a almost 1-year-old German Shepherd. So there's always somebody who needs me. So I don't have much of a ritual anymore. It's more like just write when I can and take my laptop wherever I can and write. And I think it's always kind of been that way. Even when I could write whenever I wanted, I make sure to clear my head when I need to. Because you know how it works. Sometimes you can write all day and you don't want anyone to bother you. You're in the grind. And if you have that option to do so, then it's great. But I also, you know, massive ADD, like every other human in the world, I feel like. But I need breaks. So I like to, I've got a visitor. My doggy just came in.
For the non-visual medium of podcasting, there's a giant white fluffy tail.
She can open the doors. See, I told you someone always needs me.
Yeah.
I'll just close the door. But yeah, I like to stop and work out, stop and go for a hike, and then come back and just write. And that would be the perfect days, just to have no distractions except for my own, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much it.
So what feeds the well for you? Like, I mean, you go hiking, but like what else feeds the well for you as a writer?
My stories seriously just come to me, but to make like my world building often comes with music. I really like to plug in and run. So, and when I do that, I almost see everything just come to life with the music. So I have like my favorite tunes that I'll kind of connect with, and those help me with the vibe that I'm kind of trying to set in my head. But they color themselves in, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's funny. So this book has a lot of music, because Ellie, one of the characters, is a violinist, and then there's a band, but there's also a lot of food. Like there's restaurants like are kind of at the heart of this book too. I mean, obviously you worked at Starbucks. Did you work in restaurants too, or?
No, but I starved myself for like the first 20 years of my life. So I love food now. I love it. And as a reader, I love to read about food. Like there's actually this really silly knitting mystery series that I like. And she's always talking about the cafe and the food. Mm-hmm. And I'm always like, oh, I love it. Because I love the coziness of that.
Yeah.
So, and I do like to watch food programs. I think they're fun. So.
Yeah, no, same. But no, I worked in the restaurant industry. I taught culinary school, and so it was very much like, oh, this is familiar territory. Like I felt very at home in this book because it was like, oh, these are people I know. These are. And I mean, I think that theme of addiction is also really true for people who've worked in the restaurant industry. I mean, I think if you've worked in the restaurant industry, you know what that looks like. I mean, and we always, when I was in the industry, before I got completely burnt out on it, it was, do people come to work in restaurants because they already have addiction issues and this is where they can work anyway? Or does working in the industry make you have to self-medicate because it's so awful sometimes and hard?
I think. Yeah. At least, in my experience. But I also, with my witchy ways, believe that we all kind of find ourselves in the same place together for a reason. Like, a certain group of people will find each other to help each other or drag each other down, because that happens too,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I guess it depends on what your lessons are in this life, right? That's one of the themes in the book I really love is this idea of like a soul family, and that these same characters have had this story happen over many lifetimes.
Yeah.
And I think you do that really beautifully without making it convoluted in the story. Because it's hard, I think, to talk about, when you have multiple characters, because there are a lot of, I mean, it's a big family of people and friends and spouses and all of that. And they all have multiple stories going on at the same time. But at no point did I ever be like, okay, I don't know who we're talking about.
Yeah. So. For sure. And I was very lucky that it kind of wrote itself for me, because I mean, it's one of those things, like if you stop and think about it too long, you could really freak yourself out as a writer and be like, oh my gosh.
How do all these threads go back together? Yeah.
Yeah. But it worked out, and you just let them do what they need to do, right? Mm-hmm. Let that story tell itself, and it does.
Yeah.
And it is easier with the multiple, like Ellie and Olivia going back and forth and telling their stories. That made it a lot easier to do that too.
Yeah. It's funny. I noticed, like in the book, the chapter titles are the point of view character. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is something that's happened more recently. Like I've noticed it in a lot of books I'm reading, especially first person narratives, that, there always used to be this kind of thing where you would just start at the top of the chapter. You'd notice people just start at the top to make sure you knew who was talking. And I feel like with the chapter headlines, you can stay with the story more without having to step out and kind of make sure people know where they are. And I like that approach to it a lot.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember if this book did it or not, but it was one of my first books that zinged me, if you know what I mean. Like I was like, that's an important book. I need that's, what is it? The Divine Secrets of the Ya-Ya Sisterhood. Mm-hmm. And if I'm recalling, I think it might be written that way, but I read it when I was 16 or 17.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's been years since I've read that, but I'd have to go look. Yeah, I'm curious. I may have to go look.
Yeah, I might have to also. That was an inspiring one for this book, even though I wrote this another lifetime later. But that story always stuck with me. Mm-hmm. Like the female relationships. That's when I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I do read romance. I have a lot of romance writer friends, but the thing that the romances that I prefer to read are ones that are not like these two people happening in a vacuum. Like it's always like a big friend group or like a big family, or like there's always our chosen family or, whatever, that I just don't think a story happens in a vacuum. There's always all these other people impacted by what happens. And, I think at one point in the book, I think one of the characters even says that like these things you're choosing aren't just impacting you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why side characters are some of my favorite characters, because they do add, it's like a huge thing to a story.
Mm-hmm.
The more colors you add, the more beautiful the portrait, right? So I love it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's like in this book, I really just hope people will go pick it up and read it, because I think it was also like a good spooky Halloween book to read too, like right before, and we're recording the week before Halloween. So, but there's so much going on. And like, as a reader, you're like, okay, I want to know what happens to this person. And I want to know what happens to this person after the story. And you do give us a little bit of a epilogue sort of, which I really appreciated, because I was like, oh, I want more. I want to know what happens to all of these people afterwards. But yeah, it was a lovely place to step into, and very real.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and obviously you live in Colorado, and the book takes place in Colorado and in California on the coast. Were those places special to you already? Did these places exist, or are these?
Actually, so when this story opens, Olivia is on the California Lost Coast. And it's actually a place my husband and I visited around the time I was transitioning from the book that had started as Smackdown into, I also titled this Even Witches Have Bad Hair Days Once Upon a Time. And then it became In the Pines. This book's been through some things, but I was transitioning it into a magical setting. Mm-hmm. And when we visited the California Lost Coast and there was black sand, I was just like, I saw everything. Mm-hmm. I saw Rowena, another character in the book, walking along it in her black dress, dragging salt water with her. And I was like, oh. So that place is real. And mm-hmm. I mean, I transformed it, but the basis of it is real. And where the majority of the story takes place in Colorado is actually a place my mom does retreats every year where she just takes a week to herself because she's magical and wonderful and she knows what she needs to do. So she stayed in a place not far from where I live in Colorado, in a forest. And that also colored in the lines for me that this is where it needs to be. And I fictionalized it because there was no lake there, but there should have been. So right. There's a lake in the story and it's very important to the story. But her cabin that she was staying in actually had a toilet in the shower. So I was like, huh. And I just imagined it like if these are magical cabins that clean themselves, that's something that would be a glitch that would happen. So I added that into the story.
Yeah. I have to admit, the self-cleaning cabin idea made me really happy to think about. I was like, oh yeah, that would be sweet.
Very nice. Like I would take a toilet in the shower if my house would clean itself. I would be fine with that. I'd be like, you know what? That's fine today. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, for you as a writer, like one of the things that is difficult for me when I get stuck is that I will find 8,000 things to do at home that are not writing. Mm-hmm. Like I joke about alphabetizing the pantry, that kind of stuff. Is that a distraction for you too?
Pre-child, I would definitely clean a lot. Like if I was stuck or just work out even more. But now with the child, there's lots of distractions to keep me going. But yeah, the laundry gets done if I'm stuck and things are actually polished, which isn't normally a thing around here. We got a dusty witch house here. So that's definitely true for me as well.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for realizing that, the dust is still going to be there when you get around to it, but you got to strike while the muse is hot, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And my child, when she was born, I call her my little muse because I've always had stories. But the second that little diva popped out of my body, I have so many worlds to write down. Like they just keep coming and coming, which is cool, Mm-hmm. So I'm fine with it. I haven't been stuck for a while now.
That's good. Yeah. Like it's funny. Our books are coming out the same day.
Oh, really?
I have a new book also coming out. Again, we're recording in October and this will come out in December for listeners. But yeah, so my book is also coming out on the 14th. And I was just like, oh, that's really funny that our books are coming out the same day. Hey. But yeah, I think that, this book for me, I started it like during COVID, like in the lockdown period, although I was in Tennessee and we never really had like a lockdown situation. Just, everybody got sent home kind of thing. And like, I just got so bogged down in like, this book has taken me the longest to write because there was just this gap of like, there was no outside stimulus almost to kind of make it happen. Because we were all home and there was just like making sure everybody was safe and, all that kind of stuff. And then it was weird to get back to it and really go, oh, and a lot of stuff in the story, I think changed because of COVID. Like, I think it really changed like the approach in the story. Have you found that for yourself that there was like a switch between?
I don't know necessarily. It was a little different for me though, because my COVID experience didn't really change. Because my pregnancy was really bad. So I was on bed rest. I have a COVID baby. So she was born literally right when shit was hitting the fan.
Yeah.
So I was kind of stuck, not able to leave the house or do anything before it even happened. And then when she came, we were just kind of stuck inside anyway, because we couldn't really go out. I mean,
with a newborn. Yeah.
Yeah. So my life didn't change a whole lot. And I also didn't work. I put down my writing from the time I got pregnant because I had to do IVF and it was a real journey. So I was trying to cut the stress from my life. So I didn't write from the time I got pregnant till probably when she was 6 months old. So I don't think COVID really affected me that much.
It was other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. It was more like my hormones were the plague. That was more of a challenge than anything.
Yeah.
So, but I will say my writing, I feel like, is a little different post baby, maybe just because of your life. It changes a lot bit. So I think it's maybe a little more wise, if anything. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm kind of a child, so there's that.
I was going to say, I mean, I was a child when I think about it now and I was like, oh, I was way too young to be a mom. But I know after I had my son, it was like the first time, because I turned 23, like right after he was born. And I was like, oh, I am a mortal being now in charge of this other person. And that was really scary. I mean, I was scared shitless as a new mom.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
You're like, they trust me with this little blob. I'm supposed
who am I to be doing this? Yeah.
Like, I write about fictional things that are quite silly in hindsight. Like, you want me to be in charge of this?
Yeah. I know one thing I will say, having a kid really changed. Like as a teenager, really loved horror. And as a mom, I really couldn't do it. I'm kind of back to where I can kind of do horror. I can't do gore, but I do like scary. And, but it took me a long time to get back to that. Like, I couldn't really enjoy it when he was little.
I can relate to that a little bit. I mean, I still love gore. I'm a little sad that I can't play horror movies 24/7 because it's not okay to do with a little running around.
Right.
But I am more fragile when there's a child involved. That has really changed me too. So I totally relate to that part. I don't like seeing anything that have to do with babies or anything or children in horror anymore.
Yeah, I think I'm still that way. I still can't really do children in peril. That's hard on me.
It's probably like once you're a parent, I don't see how it would go away.
Or, I mean, I think about like, Stephen King writing Pet Sematary, like when he had kids. And I was like, but I think, his thing I've seen in interviews, it might be in on writing, but I think it's in interviews where he talks about, you imagine the worst possible thing that can happen to somebody else that doesn't happen to you. And I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense to me.
So. Yeah. No, I can relate to that as well. but I think I probably just wouldn't write about anything else.
Yeah, no, I mean, same. I have a hard time with that. But you do have a horror book coming out.
I do. It's called The Hall of Shadows, and it's about a cursed deck of oracle cards.
Mm-hmm.
And the main character in it, Tess, can actually, she doesn't know why, but she has pretty much creation at her fingertips. Like she can take a pile of ashes and reincarnate it into what it was before it was burned, which is how she comes across these tarot or these oracle cards, because they were burned. And once you turn over that first card, you have to go through the entire spread, which leads you into 13 different dimensions of shadow work. So
wow,
it's a lot of fun. I had
pretty cool.
So much fun writing this one.
Yeah. So for you, like, I mean, I can see how in this, especially within the Ponds, I mean, obviously I haven't read the other books, but there's a lot of just kind of personal story that comes into that and listening to the characters. Did you do any research for the story, or did you research for the Oracle deck story?
The Oracle deck, so I made it, it's completely fictionalized.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much, I think, based on my own. I started looking into shadow work around that time, and it just kind of became part of my life. Mm-hmm. So again, just exaggerating things and obviously going the horror direction with it. Right. It's just more fancy in an exotic way.
Yeah. No, interesting. So you have that on the horizon. So I guess it's a good opportunity to kind of talk about like what's coming up for you, and like, what are your goals as a writer? Like what does success look like for you? Like what is all of that?
Obviously, like any writer, I just want everyone to pick up my copy that wants to. It's not for everybody. My writing's not going to be for everybody. It's very witchy, spooky. Most of my stuff, The Hall of Shadows and In the Pines, are going to be a little more spooky. But my intention is honestly to raise the vibrations. Like, I've always been a healer, and that's just going to emanate from me. So I'm always trying to send, even with my horror, I'm trying to send a message, You can do better. We can do better, with ourselves, with the planet, with everything. Mm-hmm. My young adult fantasy trilogy, The Lost Irwine, is all about that. It's about trying to find the light even in a time of darkness, Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of humor in that story. And that's because I feel like, sometimes that's how we need to raise it, mm-hmm. by just using laughter. Yeah. So that's pretty much what I want. I would love for my books to get out there and for my message to be heard. I guess that's what I see as success for me.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. So let's plug away, like what's coming out, when are those books coming out? And then we'll do our little game of chance.
Okay. So In the Pines is releasing November 14th of this year, 2023. Then the first book in my young adult fantasy trilogy is called The Lost Irwine. That is coming out in May of 2024. And then The Hall of Shadows is actually going to come out between like the series. Mm-hmm. So the Hall of Shadows will come out in November of 2024. So a year from now. Okay. And then the next two books in my trilogy are going to come out in 2025.
Fun. Yeah. You got a lot coming up.
I do. And I'm writing my second horror.
Nice. Are you using a different pen name for your YA, or is it under the same name?
I'm just going to use the same. Yeah. So, but people just need to be aware that I write both.
Yeah.
But I would love for everybody to read, obviously maybe there's some content in the adult books that maybe young adults wouldn't want, or mm-hmm. parents wouldn't want their young adults to read. But, and there's not really a lot of sex, but there's a ton. Mm-hmm. But the young adults, I write them for all ages.
Yeah. It's more about like where the characters are.
Exactly. Yeah. And their maturity. And, most young adults have a character that's coming of age. Like they're trying to figure out themselves mm-hmm. and identities, but aren't adults too, like
always. I mean, I think, if you're stagnant, that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
We always got to be growing and changing.
Learning. Exactly. Yeah. So I'm 43 and like, what? I don't know.
Yeah, same. I am, again, other drinking game for the podcast. I turned 50 last year. I'll turn 50 next week, or 51 next week.
Happy
And
birthday.
yeah, thanks. And I really thought that like the wisdom of the ages was going to fall on my head kind of a little bit, you know? And I do think I'm wiser at 50 than I was at 40 or 30 or 20. But yeah, I was like, no, I'm not done. I'm not done. You know, there's still a lot I got to figure out and about me and about the world and about, you know, writing, everything. So,
Oh yeah. That's what I love about getting older. I mean, I'm one of those people like, yeah, the wrinkles are starting to come. They're starting to appear. I'm not getting ID'd for the movie theater like I used to even 5 years ago because I have such a young face. But the the wisdom that continues to grow, I wouldn't want to give that up. I wouldn't want to go back. Oh, I would not want to go back to my 20s because I was a little hellion. But
yeah.
It is pretty cool to get older. It really is. It is part of the journey.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I think a lot about, you know, I think especially for women, aging is different in our culture. Like, you know, we always talk about the gravitas men have as they age, and we don't offer that to women. And I'm like, I earned those crow feet. You know, I earned those gray hairs. I'm going to keep them because I got here. And like you said, you know, there were a lot of times in my 20s, I was like, I'm not sure going to make it to 50. So yeah, like now that I'm here, I'm like, well, damn, that was successful. Let's see what the next, you know, 25, 30 years look like. But yeah, it was like, I think I do feel like that's changing some. I mean, we're still super youth oriented culture, but I do feel like, and partly I think because millennials are getting older, you know, and you all are such a big group that it's hard to say, oh yeah, we can't be kids forever. Although I do think that Xers and millennials will probably dress like they did in their 20s for the rest of our lives. But you know, that's okay too. I kind of like that. I like that I'm not moving into polyester pants and, you know, golf shoes any day.
That's not going to happen. I'll probably be in leggings till I die just because I prefer comfort.
Yeah.
You know, a good witch dress is comfortable too, though. So there's that.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So let's do our game of chance. So I always joke, one of my Scorpio traits is that I don't know how to do small talk. Probably also why I have a podcast. And so I'm going to roll a die, and depending on what number I get, you'll get a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money.
Ooh.
You can pass. And if I roll a 6, you get to pick which one you want.
Okay.
Let's see what our little purple die gives us today. 1, death. Ooh. How funny. Given the theme of your book. One of the themes of your book. So Lotharia in the book, for those who have not read it, is this beautiful kind of before, after, and in between lives place for witches. And I just kind of wondered, like, what does your personal witch's afterlife look like for you?
It looks like Lotharia. That's what Lotharia actually is what started appearing to me like in my early 30s during my shavasnas. Like, you know, when you practice yoga, that's the ending corpse pose. And the class I used to love would end with at least a 5-minute section of that. And the most beautiful music was always played. The teacher would come around and put her hands over your forehead with some essential oils, and it just took you into this like meditative state that you never wanted to come out of. And I would just picture women and men dancing around in the sand around a fire and bells around their ankles. And there was an ocean, and that's where I went. And that's what I want. That's what I picture for myself. And so I just shared it with the readers. But that's literally, that's it. Like, why wouldn't I want to go there?
No, that's what I was thinking. I was like, it's such a lovely image of, you know, just like all of these people, kind of like in their true form, almost is kind of how I imagined it when I was reading. It's like, this is their true soul's form or whatever, in this very beautiful place, kind of celebrating in between, but knowing that they would have work to do as they went back to other lives. And so, no,
it's like a break to, you know, just put everything, you know, you're a shocker. I can never say it, Ashokik records and all of that. Like, just put it all together, learn, live, relax, then go back.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, one of the things, and you kind of touched on this in something you said about, I think writing what is considered genre fiction um, gives us so much freedom to talk about really kind of deep and difficult topics that sometimes, like in a more, I guess, standard literary novel, kind of become heavy, like it's like these really, it becomes like the big theme. Although what is that Margaret Killjoy says about the real theme of literature is like betrayal, like people cheating on each other. Like that
Right.
really is what. And I was like, I feel like, writing fiction that is more considered genre fiction because there is that element of fantasy. You can talk about really hard things that are hard for people to talk about, but it's in this, like, I don't know, it's easier to make the medicine go down, I guess, a little bit.
True. No, I get that. I'm kind of an open book. I've probably, because I was so sick for so long, and like I kept, they say secrets keep you sick. And I never wanted to live inside of that hell ever again. So I've been very open about what I've been through my whole life. And I don't have a problem, talking about it.
Yeah.
But, a lot of my friends and even family who have had addictions, they're not that way. And it is hard for them. And I think, putting stuff in a fictional way really does help them. And they also see that, you can get someone to see it without saying it out loud. That's amazing.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of power in fiction. I think sometimes, people are like, oh, I really prefer nonfiction because I want facts, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, but you can learn a lot from fiction too.
Yeah, I'm like the opposite. I will read a nonfiction book now and again. I'm actually in a witchy book club, and every other month we do nonfiction. So we're constantly learning, but we do fiction every other month.
Yeah.
So that's kind of fun. For me, that helps me go outside of the box and read some nonfiction now and again. Yeah. But I learned so much from fiction. There's the lie that tells the truth, right? That's what fiction is. And I think there's just so much to offer. Like I've said it numerous times, I just love the psychology of humans. And that is just all over the place.
Yeah. Awesome. Mariah, thank you so much. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your book. And I wish you all the best in the new year. Like when this comes out, it'll be like just a few days.
Yeah, and you too.
Yeah, awesome. Well, take care. And, let's keep in touch and talk about books again some other time, maybe.
Of course. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Julian Rashke. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shenekar. Sue Fertal edits our transcripts, which are available with all of our previous episodes at witchlitpod.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Threads at witchlitpod. Please help other witches find us by leaving a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to and reading WitchLit.